and inflated spending on suppliers, resulting in negative rates of return for the economy. The recurrent bailouts have crowded out infrastructure investment and confirmed that government has no intention of implementing structural economic reform. This is reinforced by the lack of incentives to encourage responsible fiscal management on the part of state-owned enterprises, as the taxpayer carries the burden of inefficient management, not the entity itself. The lack of urgency in addressing the structural issues plaguing SOEs raises questions about the motivations behind the provision of these bailouts. The state-owned enterprises operate as crony patronage networks. Failure to act now by opening the sector to private sector investment will keep the economy locked in an indefinite low-growth trap and will hamper any attempt to stabilize the economy. President Ramaphosa's recent proposal for a state holding company to centralize South Africa's commercial state-owned enterprises is a desperate attempt at keeping unviable entities alive. The Democratic Alliance vehemently opposes it, as it will serve as a vehicle for ANC cadre deployment and patronage rather than addressing the systemic issues plaguing the SOE sector. Given the severity of financial mismanagement of most SOEs, private sector participation is vital. The President's proposed SOE holding company runs counter to this trend, and the DA calls for its rejection. The government must privatize state-owned assets. However, the divestiture and privatization of state-owned assets has been a long-standing complexity for governments, despite the fact that the estimated value of public sector assets exceeds twice global GDP, as reported by the International Monetary Fund. The process of divesting these assets has been marred by issues of cronyism and suboptimal financial returns. The Ukrainian pro-Zorro sale model is an example of what is possible. It represents a pioneering and easily replicable approach to realizing the financial potential of state-owned assets that would enable government to sell its assets through an online bidding platform. Determining the value of an asset is generally a difficult and complex process for governments. The pro-Zorro sale auction system allows for market-based pricing. The system's unique design, characterized by transparency, open and fair bidding, allows government agencies to efficiently monetize assets that have traditionally been difficult or inefficient to trade. This has led to improved trust and participation in the market, appropriately established prices, and increased market size, fairness, and efficiency. By incorporating a similar model, government land, buildings, and businesses that have been neglected by the South African government for years can get a chance to start anew, while the state would be able to generate funds and get rid of idle assets that deliver negative rates of return. South Africa's worst performing state-owned enterprises such as Prasa, Transnet and Denel must be the first entities to sell their worst performing assets through the proposed system. The South African economy is constrained by the deteriorating state of its public infrastructure, as evidenced by the D rating assigned to the country by the South African Institute of Civil Engineers on its infrastructure condition scorecard. The scorecard, which uses a five-point scale, evaluated 32 subsectors of infrastructure and found that the current condition and performance of South African infrastructure network poses a significant risk of failure. Addressing the issues of South Africa's crumbling infrastructure must therefore be a priority for policymakers, as well-maintained infrastructure is crucial for promoting economic growth, revenue generation and international competitiveness. The DA proposes that development bonds, also known as impact bonds, are a solution to the problem facing South Africa's deteriorating infrastructure. These bonds are financial instruments that are issued by government or public entities to raise funds for long-term projects aimed at promoting economic and social development. The funds raised from the sale of these bonds are typically used for infrastructure projects such as building roads, bridges and hospitals, and for financing social programs such as education and healthcare. The involvement of the private sector in funding developmental bonds helps to spur economic growth and development by providing a source of financing for essential projects and initiatives that cannot be fully supported by the public sector. In addition, the private sector can bring expertise, efficiency, and innovative solutions to these projects, helping to ensure their success. The number of employed people dropped from 16.3 million in 2019 to 14.1 million in 2020, essentially wiping out more than a decade's progress on job creation. By the third quarter of 2022, the number of people with jobs had only recovered to 15.8 million, still below the level of 16.3 million recorded in pre-COVID 2019. Poor labour policy choices have trapped millions in unemployment. South Africa needs fundamental change to the primary impediments of labour market efficiency. The DA will scrap all race-based legislation that has distorted the labour market and cadre deployment practices, and embrace a labour legislature framework that pursues non-racialism through true economic empowerment of all South African citizens. South Africa must establish a two-track approach to regulation, labour law and tax policy that reflects the country's unique economic landscape and development priorities. On the one hand, large corporations, which drive the majority of research and development and exports, require a supportive regulatory environment that can help them to remain competitive in the global market. On the other hand, small and medium enterprises, which make up a significant portion of the country's employment, need a flexible and supportive policy environment that can encourage entrepreneurship and job creation. There were approximately 2.6 million operating small, medium and micro enterprises across all industries in the country as of March 2022. The growth of the sector is therefore crucial for the country's economic survival. SMMEs, as the sector, generates 36% of South Africa's total output and employs up to 60% of the country's workers. Adopting a more supportive regulatory environment for small businesses will drive entrepreneurship, increase the number of startups, and create job opportunities. This can be achieved by fostering a transparent, predictable, and stable regulatory environment that reduces the burden on small businesses. The government must take a flexible approach towards small business regulation, recognizing their importance as drivers of job creation and economic growth. This should include the relaxation of labour regulations such as the minimum wage and working hour requirements, allowing small businesses to focus on their core operations without being encumbered by excessive regulation and taxes. Regulation should only be imposed when necessary for public health, safety and welfare, and should be designed such as the impact on small businesses are minimized. These factors require a surrounding economic environment that is characterized by low cost compliance with regulations, low cost of transactions, reasonable transport costs, reasonable cost of living, reasonable availability of capital for small enterprises, local and national government that actually seeks to smooth the path of new enterprises and existing enterprises seeking to expand, and a transparent marketplace that isn't dominated by politically dominant cartels and subservient to cartels' government agencies. The tax regime for small firms need to be addressed to accelerate their growth. We propose the following interventions: to amend Section 12E of the present Income Tax Act to allow small businesses to deduct the cost of all capital equipment from their taxable incomes in the year in which the cost is paid, not just the cost of plant or machinery used in manufacturing. Raise the annual gross income ceiling for this capital equipment deduction from 20 million to 40 million. Raise the annual turnover ceiling which qualifies a micro business for registration from 1 million to 2 million. Increase from 500,000 to 1.2 million the minimum total remuneration paid by an employer to his employees before the skills development levy contributions become compulsory. The start of 2023 has seen more rolling blackouts than the start of any other year. The instability of the energy supply in conjunction with a tumultuous political climate has had a seriously detrimental effect on the advancement of South Africa, effectively halting the economic growth potential of our country. This situation not only hinders productivity but also undermines the confidence of investors, as the possibility of realizing a positive return on investment is impeded by recurrent power outages that are evidently politically induced. There has been a notable lack of action taken over the past 15 years to address the persistent scarcity of energy supply. Eskom is representative of the failure of centralized government and its inability to provide sustained energy supply, as rolling blackouts have estimated to cost the South African economy between 1.5 billion and 4 billion rand per day. The failing state-owned enterprise sector remains the greatest barricade to the realization of virtuous economic growth in South Africa. Even through the implementation of the DA's energy sector reforms, the delivery of sustainable energy supply may take up to 10 years. Based on this grim energy outlook, the DA reiterates its call for the privatization of Eskom and the opening up of the energy sector to independent power producers. In the interim, Eskom must prioritize the streamlining of its procurement processes, while letting in massive private capacity to power a growing South Africa. By opening up the energy sector, innovation and voluntary action will keep the lights on and the wheels of the economy moving towards the growth rate needed to address declining economic participation. In his 2022 medium-term budget policy statement, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana announced that somewhere between 126 billion and 206 billion of Eskom's on-balance sheet debt will be reallocated from the entity's balance sheet onto the national sovereign debt profile. Given the already strained fiscus, transferring debt from SOEs to the national balance sheet remains a non-viable option. The DA will not support any offloading of Eskom's debt onto the country's sovereign balance sheet without a comprehensive plan to unbundle the entity and change its funding model. The orderly unbundling and restructuring of Eskom are critical requirements for achieving a well-diversified and competitive energy generation sector. This process must involve the formation of several independent generation companies, as well as the rationalization of the electricity distribution industry. Furthermore, the establishment of a competitive retail electricity sector comprising a diverse range of private sector procurement and retail is also necessary to meet the diverse needs of domestic and commercial customers and various market segments. The remaining transmission entity of Eskom should become the future Eskom, this being a national state-owned independent transmission system and electricity market operator responsible for power planning, procurement, contracting, grid system, and electricity market operation. The DA's comprehensive energy proposals are set out in our energy policy. Eskom's unannounced implementation of a semi-permanent schedule of rolling blackouts, coupled with the potential for further deterioration, has prompted numerous South African consumers to explore the possibility of transitioning to off-grid systems through the installation of rooftop photovoltaic panels, incentivizing the adoption of rooftop solar technology by households and businesses can help mitigate the impact of ongoing blackouts. While it may not resolve significant capacity shortages, it can provide much needed relief at the domestic level. The Democratic Alliance has put forward the proposal for an emergency solar rebate program to incentivize the installation of solar systems at residential properties. The program, with a duration of 3 years, aims to address the current energy crisis and would operate as follows. Tax rebates in the form of a 100% deduction for the cost of installed solar equipment, along with other items that incentivize independence from Eskom, capped at 100,000 Rand. Participants would finance the upfront cost of installation and claim the deduction against taxable income during the submission of their annual. Furthermore, the DA will not support any expenditure related to the formation of the President's proposed Ministry of Electricity, nor will the DA support any expenditure resulting from the national state of disaster around Eskom. I will now hand over to Ashel to talk about debt.